thankful for the way these stories hold on to the lifetime we won't get back. I know these rivers carry on. People tend to stick to you after time. Places tend to do the same as we do. This river carries on and on.
Hello and welcome to Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake LaMore, and this is where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. And this is episode 14. Kind of getting, today's a little more about me and my family, more or less my grandfather, who we're going to talk to here in just a minute. But I kind of want to explain. So aside from work and the podcast, I've been spending a lot of time at my family's print shop in Manteno called Weber Printing, which closed its doors just this last year in December. And I've been helping them move out a lot of the old printing machinery. I've been helping them sell it and stuff. So it's kind of brought back a ton of memories, a lot of nostalgia. And because not only did I grow up there, but so did my mom. She worked there for so many years, and obviously my two of my uncles did as well, and we can get into more of that in a little bit. So it just kind of brought to my attention that I should be having my grandfather on, who I call Papa, but everyone else knows him as Frank or Franklin Weber. So hi, Papa.
Right.
So, you have, I was going to ask you, do you remember the time sitting down and talking to you right now reminds me of, I can't remember what grade I was in, but I want to say I was in maybe 6th grade or 5th grade or something. Do you remember I interviewed you for a paper that I wrote?
Yeah.
In your basement at the old house?
Yeah, I guess it was in the basement.
Yeah, and I think I videotaped that, and I don't know if I have that anywhere, but
It'd be interesting.
yeah, I kind of want to, and I don't know if I have that paper, but I remember that I interviewed you and I taped it, and I could swear it was for that paper I wrote, and it was, like I said, 6th grade sticks out in my mind. I guess it doesn't matter what year, but I remember starting off the opening of the paper was about the tractor accident, which we'll get into later on. That's a good story that I always like to hear about. Now, it's a bad story, I guess you could say. It's miraculous. But anyway, so let's start with when did our family officially move into Manteno or Kankakee County?
In the early 1800s, but I don't know exactly what year, but they lived east of Manteno, and there's a family picture. My dad was 5 years old, so they maybe moved sooner than that, because he was born in 1888. That made him 92. They were probably born or started out in Manteno in the 1890s, thereabouts. And they lived on a farmhouse east of Manteno, and it's still there.
Yeah, and that was on Career Center Road, right? Or
no, it's east and north of Manteno.
Oh, that farm. Okay,
2 miles east and a mile north, and then back east a little ways.
I'm thinking of later on, right?
Yeah.
Later on,
They
it
went
was
west.
Yeah, later on they moved to the farm on Career Center, right?
Yeah.
And okay.
Yeah, this was the very beginning.
Okay.
Before they were there, they were living somewhere around Tinley Park.
Okay.
That's where they came. My grandparents parents came from Germany as kids, and they settled there with their parents. And I went to school, and that's where my grandfather and grandmother met in Frankfurt. And they grew up there, and they were married in I can't tell you the year anymore, but in North Piedon Church, just north of Piedon. And she was always considered a lifelong member of that church when she died.
And obviously it was before you were born.
Oh, way before.
You were born in 1933.
Yeah.
And you were born at St. Mary's?
Yeah, that's the only hospital there
in Kankakee.
At that time.
And Riverside didn't come till
60s.
Yeah, so it's about 30 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start from about that time, from when you were born. What was going on with your parents at the time?
Well, when I was born, my dad and mother were living out on the Weber farm, west of Manteno, and Grandma was alive, and they helped look after her, and Dad helped do some farming, he and his brother Harry, and that went on for a couple of years, and they decided to move into town, and so they did, and they moved in a house on Elm Street, across from where the Hillman's Hospital used to be, right on the corner.
Yeah.
And I was born from that place, although I was born in St. Mary's. That's where we lived in from 33 until 37. That's where I lived. They moved there in about 31, I think.
And
32.
So, yeah, and just to clarify exactly where that's at, it's right across from what used to be the Riverside Resolve Center. It's now the Iroquois Mental Health Resolve Center is what it's called currently at this time.
Yeah,
but it's that big white house you see, and now it's an apartment building, I think, isn't it?
It might be empty. I don't know.
I don't think it's empty. People live in it. But I always thought it was made into a couple different apartments there. I could be wrong, but the house is still there, and you can tell it's got age on it.
Oh yeah, it's old.
Yeah. So you moved there, and then is that where the tractor incident happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was 3 years old at that time, and I was always hanging around my dad quite a bit. He had a machine shop and a wood shop out in the back, and he would do work out there, and I always liked to watch him work. And so this one morning, we were getting close to lunchtime, he was going to hook up his old Fordson tractor to a plow, and because we had 10 acres, and apparently he was going to plow something. I don't know if it was getting late to be plowing that 10 acres. Maybe he's going to plow up some garden area or whatever. But anyway, he was going to hook up to that plow, and I was out there watching him like normal, and I was standing alongside the tractor on his right side, and about the time he was going to hook that up, my mother called out that it was lunchtime, and he saw me run around the right side of the tractor, and he thought I went to the house. I mean, he wanted to finish hooking up that tractor. His usual way of hooking up to a tractor or any implement would be to look over his right shoulder, and that's just what he did. And instead of me going to the house like he thought I did, I got on the other side of the tractor by that rear wheel, and so he started backing up, and all of a sudden he heard me holler, and he stopped, and he looked down there. My leg was laying underneath that wheel, between the knee and the hip.
Did it just happen so quickly that you didn't see that the wheel was coming towards you?
That old tractor was a jerky thing. Anyway, at least it was in the later days when I knew it. And it wasn't smooth operating like the ones we know today. And so he got off that tractor, and went to raise the tractor and pull me out. And that tractor had wide.
What do you call them? I call them spikes. Kind of, they're not pointed like a spike, but they're a rung.
Can't think of the name.
Lug?
No, spokes. Wide spokes, about three inches wide, and they were, the wheel was narrow at the hub where the axle is, and the tread part of the wheel was wide, so they were on an angle coming out from the middle. And he put his shoulder up against those spokes, and he raised that tractor up with his shoulder, and he pulled me out.
I was talking about the I guess it's the treads on the actual wheel.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that tractor had what they call lugs on it, and those things would kind of fill up with dirt when you're using it. And luckily, I think at that time they were, because when he ran over me, it broke the bone in my bone in my leg between the hip and the knee, and was lucky. My kids that age, from the knee to the hip, is not very long, and yet it happened to go in between the two joints and not hurt the joints. It just broke the bone.
And it just broke it. It didn't actually puncture your skin, right?
No, it just broke it, and they slipped past one another.
Yeah.
And anyway, he did what I just said. He lifted that thing up and pulled me out. And I think my mother called our druggist in town and had him come over with his car. And I remember, a little bit that I can remember, that they laid me in his back seat with a board under my leg. It's about all I remember of it. And they took me to St. Mary's Hospital, and they x-rayed it and found out the bones had slipped past one there, so they had to put me in traction. And in those days, things were kind of cruel, or not cruel, but crude, I guess you'd say. And all they used was tape to hold your foot up against a rope fair, and that would pull on your leg to try and get the bones to come together again, because they were laying kind of side by side for a ways.
So it was one of those, like, your foot's on like it's up on a pulley.
My foot's raised up in the air, and it's on a rope, and the rope goes over a pulley with a weight down on the other side of the bed, and that's supposed to gradually pull my leg out and get the bones to match. Then they can set the leg. Well, 3 years old, I was wiggling a lot, and it was in the summertime. It was hot and sticky, and no air conditioning back then. And I wiggled around, and the tape had come loose, and it wasn't doing any good. So Dr. Hamilton was our doctor at that time, and he had told the nurses to have mother call and go to his office and see him, so he could tell her what problem was going on. So she did. And they agreed that they were going to drill a hole in my heel and run a pin through the heel and stick it on that bracket that my foot would set in. And then it wouldn't move away from there. And eventually I got it pulled back into place. And then they set the leg in the cast, and I came home. So that's pretty much how that story went. And my leg healed up fine after all of that. And
there was something, if they wouldn't have done the pin, you would have had a limp, right?
Yeah, he told my mother, if we don't do this, he says that boy's going to have a limp the rest of his life, because the bones will be past one another and his leg's going to be short. So it was cut and dried that she had to do something like that.
Yeah, because those bones had to come back together so they could grow properly.
And that's what they did, and it worked.
And I think one of my favorite parts of this story is, while you were in the hospital, what else was happening in the hospital that day?
Oh, yeah. We found out later, a lot later, that my present wife was born while I was in the hospital at 3 years old.
Yeah, it's just wild to me.
We didn't know that till a number of years later. We kind of put things together and figured that out.
Yeah.
But that's what kind of took place then.
And we know that would have been July 22nd, because that's when Kid's birthday is.
That's her birthday, yeah. So it happened right in that era.
Yeah. That's just so funny to me. So, Kid's got something. Kid is what I call my grandmother, by the way. Oh, yes. So, as you can imagine, that Fordson tractor was so heavy. I
Yeah.
mean, the thing it's all metal. It's all
Yeah,
iron, all
very,
cast iron.
very heavy. Yeah. Well, some things I'm thinking about. That afternoon, different people in town, some of the men folks heard about what happened, and they all came over there, and they all tried to raise that tractor up, and they couldn't budge it. So I never thought much about it until the last few years and what took place over there. And he didn't do that alone. He had the help of God, I think, helping him raise that tractor, because there's no way he could have raised that tractor up.
And then what I didn't realize until, and all of, this story and so many other stories can be found in my grandfather's memoir, which is the Prairieland Printer, that he put together along with my oldest brother, Josh. And I didn't realize till I read the book about all the different was hernia issues that your father had. What he had some.
Oh, he had hernia problems.
Right, but that probably stemmed from that.
It could have. That might have been where he got it. We don't know that.
I mean, to me, that makes sense because that tractor
he was
so
always
heavy.
doing heavy work.
Yeah.
Anyway, running a sawmill and doing different things. And
yeah, but not picking up a however many
no one ever
1,000-pound tractor.
In my growing up, that's what caused him to have that problem.
Yeah.
Just don't know, but it's interesting to wonder.
Right, it's a good possibility.
Yeah, sure is. Yeah.
So 3 years old, you heal up, your leg heals up, and I suppose your story really gets interesting when you turned 11. Obviously, things happened before then, but 11 that was the year that you discovered your life, right? What you like to do, your lifelong passion.
But in between that, after that accident happened, and we stayed on that place, that was in 1933. In 1937, that house we lived in belonged to my dad's sister, and they wanted to sell it, so we had to find a place to live. So there was another 10 acres on the east side of town along Highway 50, and they bought that, and we moved over there in 37. Between 33, well, actually, I got hurt in 36. So between 36 and 37, I was still on that place, and then we moved over on the east side of town, and that's where I stayed until the last few years ago.
Right. And that's where the print shop stands to this day.
Some of that property, yeah.
Yeah. So, and the house that you built there too is still there as well.
Oh, yeah.
So we still have how many acres left of that 10 acres?
Just a couple lots.
Yeah.
But anyway, once we were over there, and I went to school like normal, like other kids did, and played around and had a good time. And I in fifth grade, apparently, I was wanting to do something different. I wanted to make my name and my address somehow. And so I went to the Hilson House drugstore, and I bought a rubber stamp.
Was that in town? Was that in Manteno, Hilsenhof? Yeah. Okay.
And I brought that home, and I could take those rubber pieces apart and slip them in a slide and make your name, Franklin Weber, on the top, and then I could put my P.O. box at that time and Manteno down at the bottom. And I thought that was pretty cool. And then that same summer, after I had that, I'd go visit my aunt and uncle in Chicago for a week, usually.
Where exactly in Chicago? Do you remember?
69th and Wentworth.
Okay.
On the south side. And this particular time I was there, the lady next door, Mrs. Babcock, called me over to the fence line, and she handed me this little printing press that she found in the attic that she figured her sons must have had that at one time. And she thought I might like that, so she gave it to me, and I thought that was pretty neat at that time, but I wasn't excited yet, but my uncle come home that night, and he worked for an engraving company in Chicago that worked with printers, and he was quite familiar with a lot of that stuff. So he was getting excited like I was starting to get that way, and so he helped me work up putting all that together, and he got some new rollers for the little printing press, and not that particular time, but I went back there a couple of weeks later, and we brought some little thin strips of wood that Dad had in his backyard, and we had to make a type case to put type in. And he had a picture one, but we really didn't know the sizes of it. But anyway, kind of figured something out, and he had a little foot levered jigsaw down in his basement, and I used that thing to cut all those little pieces out and notch them so they would fit over one another. And I made a type case just like the regular ones, only it's not exactly the same size, but it worked.
Do you still have that type case? No.
After I got some other type cases and things, that wasn't like the rest of them, and I should have kept it, but I didn't. So we worked with that for a while, and I got some small type. First, I got some larger type. When maybe this next time I went to Chicago with him, he took me to work with him one day in his office where he was. And at noontime, one of his accounts was a Prairie Farmer WLS print shop. And so we went over there and watched what they call at the time the dinner bell program. And after that was over, we went downstairs to the print shop, and he'd already been telling those fellas about his nephew getting this little printing press. And they thought that was kind of cool. And so he introduced me to them, and they talked to me. I don't know what all we talked about, but anyway, it was interesting because that was all big stuff to me. And they showed me their big rotary press that they printed their magazine on and whatnot. And one fella went into a cabinet where they keep things, and he brought out a little package, and it had a font of 18-point Bedoni type. That was the name of the style of the type. And he gave me that. So my first font of type come from Prairie Farmer WLS, and I thought that was a pretty nice thing too. So that's how I got started with that little bitty press, and I'd print postcards and with that big type on that, and I bought some other small type to print on envelopes and whatnot, because I was kind of limited that the press wasn't very big, so I just would do little cards, and I printed that for a couple of years, and then eventually I picked up a bigger printing press that had been in Manteno, and that relates back to when I was in Chicago, because once I got that little printing press, then I think one of the times my cousin was also over there for the week. He's a little bit older than me, and we went down the alley across the 69th Street, and there was a printer over there. And we went in and talked with him and got to know him pretty good, and asked him questions like I like to do. And we'd come home, and he had a printing press over there that he wanted to sell. But I wasn't needing that kind of a press or a way to get it home because it was big and heavy. But
Manteno, you wanted it, though.
Yeah, in Manteno at that particular time, a friend of ours had a contracting business going, and they were making Coca-Cola boxes out of wood at that time. It was during the war. And they'd have to go to the local newspaper, and they would print this on this wood, the Coca-Cola design. And that printer always had to readjust his press for that thick wood compared to thin pieces of paper. And after a while, he was kind of getting tired of that. And I heard about that, and I told him, well, there's a printer in Chicago that wants to sell a press that could print on that. So I called my aunt and got his phone number in Chicago, and they called him up and talked with him, and ended up buying that press and brought it over here. And they used it until that they didn't make Coca-Cola boxes anymore. And then eventually he gave it to me, and I brought it home, and then I was able to print on a much bigger sheet, about 8.5 by 11. And one year I in school you got these tablets you have to write a lot of stuff on, so I took the tablet apart and made up my name and grade 7 and place I put the year and whatnot, and I printed some tablet sheets, and then I glued them back together again, and I used that for 7th and 8th grade, I guess. But anyway, I
So
still
you're
got
the
some
only
of
kid that had their name actually
I was the only
typed
one
out.
that had my name printed on. So I started doing that when I was in 7th grade.
So just to kind of clarify, someone that might not be familiar with the type of printing we're talking about letterpress.
Yeah.
So you want to explain exactly how a letterpress works simply?
Well, letterpress, all the words that you use to make, or the type of material you use to make up words, are pieces of lead with a design on the one end of it, which is A, B, C, D, or whatever it happens to be, and you line words up one letter after the other and fit them into a. We had we call a composing stick, and you'd line up, you'd hold that in your hand, and you put the letters side by side, starting from the left to the right, and the letters are upside down, and you would put all your words in there, and then you had spacing material, and you would space out the words so they would fit tight, and they designated length of line that you wanted it set in, and you did that for whatever lines you had to do, and then you had to take them out, and you had to put them in what we called a chase, and that was a steel frame that fit in the press. When you had all your type locked up in this frame, you had some wood material to go fit around it so it'd hold it in place. And in printers' terms, they call that furniture. So we get all our furniture in there and make everything fit tight. And we had some wedges, which they called at the time coins, and they had a little tool on there, and those coins were tapered, and you'd turn them in a certain way, and they'd expand, and they'd lock that type up in that steel chase nice and tight. Then you would pick it up and lock it in the printing press, and the rollers would run over it and ink it up. And a lot of people have seen these old printing presses with a big round white or round wheel, not a wheel, a plate, I guess you call it, at the top, and the rollers that pick up the ink off of that. And anyway, you put the paper on this one part, and it would move itself forward to the type, and it would impress the paper onto that inked up letter type, and then it would move back, and you take it out, and you print another one. That's how it all started. They did that, work like that for lots of years.
And then in order to, I'm sure some are thinking, well, what about pictures? How do you print a picture?
Well, that's where my uncle came in. Where he worked, that's all they did was make picture plates to put in magazines and in school books and encyclopedias. They did real fine work over there. So they'd make the plates over there. They give them a picture, and they'd make a copy of it with photography, and then they would run it through some chemicals, and eventually it would etch into a piece of copper, and there would be a lot of little dots in there, and that would make up an image of a person, or just maybe it's just type. It's hard to say what they would be using it for, but that's how you got the plates made, and they were the same height as the type, so they all fit in that chase together with the type, and then you could print it.
And then when you were talking about the company that made the Coca-Cola boxes, that was where the Manteno American Legion is today, right?
No,
it was that building.
No. This place was out near Lake Manteno, as it is now. Before, it was the old brickyard back in the 40s. And over the years, there was a horseshoe factory in that same building after they weren't there anymore. And then other things have been in there. The machine shop has been in that building. And now it's some people with ambulances keep their ambulances in there. But that's where all that was done. They'd cut out the wood to size and paint it, and then they'd come over to this one building, and they had some guys that stand there and feed those pieces into the press and take them out and stack them so they dry. And then they would have ladies in town put all that together for them. They made up special jigs to hold all the parts of that box in a jig, and put your sides in, and the ends and the bottom pieces, and they had some metal straps that fit all the way around the ends to hold it all together. And they would they made a machine to be like a punch, only it was a kind of a punch, but it was flat and it was magnetized, and you put a nail on there and you push down on it, and it would go through that metal into the wood, and eventually it'd go all the way around that box, and that'd make the box secure so it wouldn't fall apart. If they didn't have the band on it, they could have come apart easy, but the band made sure everything stayed together. And they made those for about 3-4 years maybe.
And what was do you remember the name of that?
Automotive Improvement Company.
Okay, that was the name of the place.
Mr. Schreffer was running that.
Okay. I don't know why for some reason I thought your book had referenced where the Manteno American Legion is today.
That was another thing I talked about, where during the war, that was a defense organization.
Oh.
And they made parts for machine guns over there.
Okay.
And I was in there several times because they did a lot of drilling, and you have to use a lot of oil so the drills don't get hot. And my dad had this sawmill, and we had a lot of sawdust, and they would buy sawdust from us, and he'd take it over there in the big gunny sacks, and they could chop up the oil, and I went with him, so I got to see all what was going on, which was interesting to me. And that was back in 43, probably 44, somewhere in there.
Yeah, right in the middle of the war. Yeah.
That's before I got interested in printing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because that didn't happen until 1944, right?
1946. About 44. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been. It
happened about that time.
Yeah, right around that time. So let's get back to the printing then. So you eventually got this bigger press that could print on an 8.5 by 11 sheet.
Yeah.
Now, what was the first job you did? How did I know you talked about printing your own tablet of paper for school? That you
that's
could write
probably
on.
the first thing I did.
For someone else, what was?
I got to know the publisher of the Manteno paper at that time, but he just come to town. He from Chicago, and I got to know him a little bit, and
he taught his name was Russell.
Mr. Mansfield.
Mansfield.
Yeah, and I was interested in. Well, I was going to maybe print this little newspaper for our school. Now, just a single sheet, 2 sides, at that time. And I think he maybe set it up for me once. Then he thought, I'm going to let you learn to run this machine. You can set it yourself. And then he was pretty brave, but he did that. He let a kid get on his machine and set type, and I'd set it, and I'd have mistakes. I'd have to go back and set lines over. But it was a good learning experience for a kid in 7th and 8th grade.
So was that the linotype machine then, or what was that?
Yeah, his linotype.
His linotype machine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I did that. I think we did 2 or 3 issues, or maybe more, because and I graduated then in 8th grade, so that didn't happen anymore. But I did several issues of that, one for the grade school, one for the high school, and but then about that, just about before I was able to do that, I acquired a printing press from a shop in Bondfield. This fellow was putting an ad in the paper, and he was going to be selling his shop because he was being transferred. He worked for the railroad, and they were moving him on. And so he put an ad in the Kankakee paper, and I heard about it. And the folks went out there on a Sunday, and we looked at it, and they thought it'd be a nice thing for me to have. So he wanted $250, I think, and we weren't very prosperous in those days like everyone else during the war. But they went to the City National Bank in Kankakee, and the guy loaned them $250, and we went out there and we bought that and brought it home. And I had it sitting out in the yard for a little while because I didn't have a place to put it. But we had a chicken house right next to where it was setting, and the chicken house was kind of a long building with a room off to one end to the side. We didn't have that many chickens anymore, so I shoot all the chickens in that one side and tore the chicken house all apart, cleaned it up, put some new boards on the floor and rubber flooring, rubber matting on the floor, and put some cinder blocks underneath the floor joists to hold them up, because I'm going to put some heavy printing and presses in there, and I didn't want the things to wobble all over. The floor had to be pretty tight. So I did all that, and Bean's dad had a sawmill, and we had a lot of boards over there. I lined the inside walls with these boards and took sawdust and put in between the walls, and made a good insulation for winter times, so I could keep it warm in there. And I did all that, and I got some Celotex material it's like a wall board, and nailed it on the walls and on the ceiling, and that made the place look pretty nice. And then I moved that press in there that I got from Bonfield.
What kind of press? What was it called? Do you remember?
It was called Old Style Gordon.
Okay.
8x12. And I used that, and I printed that little school paper with that, and other things that came along, and I did that for a while. Then I found this Mr. Mansfield, I used to go and after this was in high school now probably. I was over there, and I saw an ad in a magazine, a newspaper that he got for printers. Someone had a little bigger press than what I had for sale in Chicago. And we went and looked at that, and they bought that for me, and I had it hauled home, and we put that in there. So I had two machines, and that printing press come from the Perkins Products Company, the original makers of Kool-Aid products.
Really?
That you made drinks with.
Yeah.
And got it in that building, and that'd been in that Kool-Aid place for a long, long time. And had grease and oil and stuff accumulated on it, and all that sweet smelling Kool-Aid powder was on there, and that was like the sweetest smelling print shop a long ways away.
Well, I suppose it got rid of maybe some of that chicken smell.
Yeah, I did. Well, I didn't have any in there at that time, but so then I printed whatever come along from people in Manteno. I got one fella he drove a truck and hauled drugs from Chicago to the Kankakee drugstores, and he needed freight bills. So I again had my uncle in Chicago find I gave him a sample of a freight bill I wanted, and he had someone set that up for me so I'd have a plate and I could print the freight bill. So I did that, and that was probably in 8th grade. I did some of that.
Okay, so that would have been the late
that's 47.
47, maybe. Okay.
Yeah. So then did a lot of things. I printed some wedding invitations for several people back in those days. And a lot of different jobs that come around, I was able to do it. I did them. And then I went to high school. And the first year I went to St. Pat's in Kankakee, and that was kind of a hardship to getting down there all the time, because you had a thumb or right or take a real early bus to get down there. And so I did that for a year, but I liked the school, but I just didn't like the traveling. So
yeah,
next year I went to Manteno High School, and during the course of the school year, why it was time to print annuals, or to get the annuals put together.
Which is the yearbook.
Right. Yeah. So I asked Mr. Nagy who printed them, and he says, well, fellas in Piatone print them. And then I found out how much a page they charged to print them, and I told him, well, I thought I could do that too. So he did a lot of thinking about it, and he gave me the job. Here I am, a sophomore in high school.
Printing the yearbook.
Yeah, and I didn't have the type equipment to set it up with, but I found there was a place in Peoria that set type for people. So I got all my copy together and marked out how long I wanted the line set, and I sent all that to Peoria, and they set it all up and sent it back Railway Express, and I picked it up and laid it all out, and I printed the annual.
But you didn't have any binding equipment.
No,
So
I didn't have to.
So how did it get bound together then?
All I had to do was print the pages. The Blankenberg photographers printed all the color or the picture pages, photography wise, and I printed the page across from it, telling what was on that page.
Okay,
that's how that worked. And then when it was all printed, I brought all my paper to the high school. That and all the pictures, they shipped that to Galesburg to a bindery house, and they did the binding. And it all worked out good. It looked nice when it come back.
Do you still have? You still have one of those? Yeah.
I got 2 of them.
You got 2 of them. Okay.
Yeah, I printed it 2 years.
Okay, so your sophomore year and your junior year,
Yeah.
I take it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did that, and he was worried. He'd come over every once in a while and see how I was getting along with that thing. But I made it done. And then another time when I was over there at Manteno schools, it was election time in Manteno, and there was about 4 people running for mayor, and they printed. That was paper ballots back then, and so Mr. Mansfield, the newspaper, he set up the type form for the ballots, but he didn't have a printing press to print it. So he gave it to me, and I took it back to my shop, and I printed the ballots. I think we printed probably 500. That was about. They never usually used that many, but anyway, they did 500. And there was a lot of people voting that day. And in the afternoon, Mr. Nagy got a call from him, Mansfield, that they were running out of ballots. And have Franklin go home and print some more ballots. So he had to come get me out of school. I went home and printed some more ballots for him.
That's the funniest story. I always enjoy that one. I'm just thinking about that, how you get called out of school because you got to print more ballots.
Yeah.
That's just great. And I was going to comment too, for anyone that actually wants to see a linotype machine, you can Google that, you can look it up on YouTube, but there's also actually one at the Kankakee County Museum.
Yeah, there's one there
that I highly suggest going to see if you're interested in seeing. So a linotype machine is what actually made those lead pieces of type that would make your sentences or whatever it was that you were printing.
You had a hot metal pot, what do you call it, melted the lead. It was 550 degrees all the time. And when you set a linotype, a mechanism would send all those little letters that make up words were called matrix, made out of brass. And they would go across into a casting mechanism on the machine, and they'd fit up type against a mouthpiece from the metal pot, and a plunger would push a bunch of lead up against those matrix and form that linotype. And there was a mold that metal went in, so the body of the type line would only be so thick and so long, and it'd be nice and smooth and be all equal on the one side to the other. It wasn't ragged, and that's how that was done. And then they'd cut them to size and you'd put them in the printing press and you'd print.
So, I mean, you must have been doing pretty well for, being in middle school and even in high school, as far as you always had, I would imagine you always had some money on you.
I always had a few dollars, yeah. I was lucky. I always had spending money, yeah. And one time, my dad was in the hospital, and my sister and I went to see him, and we took the bus to Kankakee, and we got off the bus, and as we were walking to the hospital, we went past a little candy store on Court Street, and I stopped in there, and we got a little bag of candy. And I reached in my pocket and pulled out a bunch of change or whatever I happened to have. And she says, where'd you get all that money? I says, I got a print shop. And I was as proud as could be. I had a print shop.
So you're doing so well. You're printing for, helping Mr. Mansfield with different things. You're printing for that trucking company. So, things are just building up for you in high school. I know you printed for a little bit for the nuns as well,
Oh, yeah.
at Our Lady Academy, which
Yeah.
was which was the Catholic school attached to St. Joe's here in Manteno.
Right.
So what happens after you graduate high school? And you finished at St. Pat's, right?
Yeah, I did. I went back and finished at St. Pat's. After high school, I went to work with a public service company, and I worked there as a groundman for a few years. And that work wasn't working out right with me because I had a weak back, and I could see what those fellows were doing, and that was something I wasn't able to handle. I didn't think so.
And that was actually like putting up the electricity poles and things like that.
So I left there, and eventually I got a job working out at Florence Stove Company in West Kankakee in their shipping department, and I worked there till they always have layoffs over there. They run out of parts, so everybody on the line has to go home. Well, for some reason or other, they didn't have a lot of orders or going, so I got laid off.
Where was that in Kankakee? The Florence?
That's the one where Roper's was. It's all tore down.
Okay, that was. Oh, I forgot that was the name of Roper
At that
before.
time.
Yeah. Before it was Roper.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then I got laid off, and it was hard to find a job because I was what they called draft bait back then, and I got laid off before Christmas. Anyway, I got a letter from Uncle Sam a little while later. Your friends and family want you to go to the service. And
is that really what it says? Your friends and family want you to go?
I forget how it's somewhere. Yeah. And in May, then I went to the Army. So then nothing happened for a couple of years.
And that would have been before the Korean War, right?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was at the end of the Korean War.
Or the end.
I went in on the tail end of that. And I never went overseas. I was always in the States somewhere.
Right.
And so I served those 2 years out, and I got out, and then we got married. Ann and I got married. And then I went to work at a newspaper in Onarga as a printer, helping put the pages together and do job printing that they had to do over there. Another fellow and I did all that work. And I did that for a year or so, and I got a chance to come to Kankakee and work at Acme Printing Company. And that was more job printing, which I liked. I wasn't crazy on newspaper printing. And
just so people have reference, the Acme Printing was where the gas and wash is now.
Right.
In Kankakee, they actually tore that building down.
That's all
in order to build that gas and wash.
Yeah.
By the Pope Race building.
Yeah.
In Kankakee. So
I worked there for a number of years, and then my work was kind of getting busy at my shop a little bit, and then I had a chance to go to work in Pieto in the newspaper again, and I was going to make a few more dollars. Well, I was going to get about the same pay, but I got to use their equipment to use for myself, which wasn't happening before.
Well, before you continue, I always wondered why, straight out of high school, why didn't you stick with just printing as your job for yourself?
Because I thought that would be a nice place to go work and get good longevity at those big companies,
Okay.
But this wasn't worked out right for me.
Yeah, at that time. Yeah. Anyway, right out of high school. But anyway, so you were working for Russell, you said?
Yeah, I went to work for Russell Printing.
In Piatone?
Yeah, in 1969. And I worked there till I opened my shop in 1971.
So it wasn't long. And during this whole time, you were still printing, though.
At home.
At home.
Yeah. After I got back from the service, then we built a home, and I put that stuff that was in that chicken house print shop down in our basement. So I did a lot of work down there. I'd come home at night, and I always had a lot of stuff to do.
So that was just kind of like a part-time. You had a full-time job and then a part-time job.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much just word of mouth from when people knew that you printed before, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it was just...
Yeah, a lot of it wasn't. Some of it was I was doing some work for somebody who had ties with A.O. Smith, and I print things for them, and it was going to all the different places in the country, literature for people that sell A.O. Smith silos and things of that nature. That worked out pretty well. It kept me busy, and that's what it was all about, and I enjoyed it. Always liked what I did.
So something that came up the other night, the Noble Dairy Queen stores.
Oh yeah,
they're actually sponsors of this podcast now.
Oh, are they?
I talked to Joe, who is their he kind of runs the day-to-day operations of all the different stores, and I was telling him that, hey, my grandfather actually used to do printing for Sherb Noble. Now I couldn't tell him much more than that because I didn't know when did you?
That happened after I moved into that shop
at Russell.
Yeah, I think so. No, after I left Russell's. I might have done some of that in the basement. I can't quite remember exactly. Mm-hmm. But anyway, there was a lot of little league teams here in town, and he would print up little cards, and it was good for a Dairy Queen. And he'd give those to the coaches. And after the game, the coaches would give all the boys a free card to go get a Dairy Queen. Well, the boys would go over to the Dairy Queen, and they had their mother and dad and sister and brother with them. So they all got some. So he gave away one, but he got 4 or 5 others.
He got people to buy.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I did that for a number of years. And then I was printing for his Dairy Queen business, different forms that he used in the business.
How did you meet Sherb Noble?
Through a friend that worked over there, Bob Pearson. He was a printer also. He worked out at Amberg's in Kankakee, and I got to know him. And he was a real nice fellow, and his folks even worked for Sherb when he first started the business. And then when his folks got old, his son Bob came in their place and took it over.
Okay.
But I did a lot of work for Sherb, yeah.
So that was, you think, late 60s or sometime in the 70s?
Yeah.
You started
I did
doing
some
work
yet in the 70s, yeah.
Yeah. So you get the building opened up in 1971 under Weber Printing, or technically F. Weber Printing.
Yeah.
We just always said Weber just because it
had to do that because of incorporation.
Right.
There was another Weber Printing somewhere, and we couldn't have that.
So who was working there besides you? How did that all fall in line?
When that first opened, it was Ann and myself. I was over there all day and come back and work at night for about 2 or 3 hours. But in the mornings, Ann would come over and she'd be working by the desk and answering the phone or whatever. It was slow at first getting going. But she'd come over and help me. And she helped me for 40 years. Working there in the front and talking with people and the customers and doing the book work, all that type of thing that she had to do, and she did a good job of that. So that was fine. Eventually, a number of years later, while my daughter-in-law was working there, she gave her some of that job, so she didn't have to do it all, and that worked out all right too. And then my boys were all in high school when I started that, so they weren't over there unless they'd come in after school and look around, but they were not involved in it too much. But finally, Danny graduated, and he went to work at a spring factory in Chicago Heights for a number of years, not too many, but he stayed there for a while, and I think they might have gotten slowed down, and he was maybe laid off. Then he came to work for me, and then he stayed there for 35 years, maybe somewhere like that. And then Jim, he was out of high school, and then eventually he went into the Marine Corps, and he was in there 3 years. And when he got out, he came and he worked over there too as a pressman, and he worked there until we closed it up. And Danny was a pressman, and he also did all the work in what we call the back room on the letterpress printing and scoring covers to be folded, and printing raffle tickets and numbering them and all that kind of work. And he got doing that quite well. We had a man working for us by the name of Vic Chicky, and he was a retired printer from up near the Heights, and he lived in the trailer park. So he come over one time after he got settled here and talked to us, and so he came over and worked for us a few hours a day. I forget how many, but anyway, he was there for a number of years till he got not feeling well and couldn't work anymore. And he taught Danny a lot about how to run a linotype machine and how to run that Heidelberg press and do nice work on it. So that worked out quite well. We were happy to have him and help Danny to be good at what he had to do, and that worked out good. And Jim?
Yeah, I imagine you were, at that time, you were busy with other stuff. I mean, I'm sure you showed him running the letterpress and the type, but you were so busy.
I was doing other things, and Vic was a good teacher for him, maybe better than I was teaching him. And but he taught him well, and he'd listen to him, and that worked out nice. And I showed Jim pretty much how to do the offset printing when he came in there on the little, what we call the 1250 multilith press, and he got that down pat, and he did do it then all the while he was there. He printed all kinds of different jobs on that offset press. Several different kinds of offset presses he could run. And then when John Rocha was working there, he'd run the bigger presses, offset presses. And they were all busy at a lot of times. So sometimes I had some other help in there, helping out and occasionally. And when we needed more people, they could come in and they knew how to run some of those machines, and that worked out very well too. So it all worked out good for us.
And I don't know exactly, but my mother, Dawn LaMore, she worked in the pre-press department, and I want to say she started full time after high school, right?
Yeah, after high school, and she went to the to Career Center and studied printing, so she got a good knowledge of a lot of that stuff early on, and so she was able to come in there and do work up front, and we were still doing paste up. Putting stuff together to do on offset printing, and then we started getting in a computer to where we could set stuff up and come out on film and then make plates from that, and that made a big difference in how our workflow went, and that was a much better. And then later on, we hired a girl by the name of Kathy.
What was her? I can't remember. I don't know. I always knew
Dethridge.
Knew her as Dethridge, but she was. She had a different name at the time. I can't remember her. It was her maiden name.
Her maiden name was Hartman.
That's what it was.
And she'd worked at a little shop on Court Street in Kankakee, at a little print shop there. And that lady was going to retire, and I think I heard that story, and I knew that this girl was working there and that she was doing nice work. So I called the lady to see if she could have permission to come in down and see me if she was closing. That was fine. So she came down. She was like in her very early 20s, all clean, real spiffy, nice looking, and boy, it's right there. She was a nice person to have, and she was. She's beautiful personality with her, and she got along fine with people, and that's what you need. And because people come in sometimes and want the craziest things done, and you got to kind of watch yourself how you deal with them to try and keep everybody happy. But she was good at that, and she worked there for over 30 years. And then one Sunday, 3 years ago, she had a stroke and died on the spot, and that was shocked us to. You couldn't believe how bad that was to hear. She was just like one of our children because she'd been there so long, and that was pretty tough. But we found another person to take her place from Kankakee, Nan Wagner, and she filled in then until we closed the shop. And she was good at her work too. She was real good artistic, and she could do a lot of things that the other Kathy hadn't been able to do yet. So we lucked out all the way around.
Yeah, I got, I grew up going there and seeing Kathy, and so she was almost like an aunt or a mother to me. And then
Yeah.
once I finally started working there full time, we worked side by side, just like my mom used to do with her. And so, yeah, she was amazing. She was one of the heartbeats of the print shop.
She sure was.
Yeah,
Yeah, she and that John Rocha, they were what I call the real top ones over there. That they had a lot of get and go and get things done, and they did a good job. My boys did too, but they were just fine people to work for you.
And so I can't remember if we went over this or not, but to go over it again for offset printing, before you would design something on the computer and then get that transferred to film and then get that transferred to a plate, we had this ginormous camera in the darkroom, and you would literally, someone would bring in a picture or maybe a sheet of type, right? And you would literally take a picture of that and then develop that film, and then that film would go onto the plate, right?
Yeah, a lot of times. And then we did other things with that camera too. When the Versatech started up and the hospital closed down, people were buying some buildings out there, and they had big blueprints, and they needed copies of those blueprints, and we'd have to put the blueprint in that big copy board on the camera and shoot part of it. Then we'd have to move it over and make another copy of it, and that would be filmed. Then we'd have to take that film eventually and put it all together and make one copy of it, so they had something to look at, and that was kind of tedious getting all that lined up right.
Yeah, because there's a lot of details in blueprints.
Yeah.
So
And we did some of that.
Yeah.
And it seems like there was always someone wanting to bring something like that in to have copies made, and that was what we'd have to try and accomplish for them.
Right. And then eventually you did hire Lyndon Walker.
Yeah.
He was there for a long time as well.
Because I was doing a lot of that, and I just didn't have the time anymore. And I don't remember how we got a hold of him, or he heard about us or what. But anyway, he came to work. He worked for us for a number of years, and that's pretty much what he did. Was a dark room work and light table, putting what he developed in the dark room. He'd come out in the light table and put it together so he could. And he'd burn a plate that we could put on the press and print the job. And he did some pretty good work too. He was kind of tedious work also, printing books and things, and he'd have to put all those pages together just right, so when we printed it and folded it, it all came out correctly. So yeah, he was good, and he eventually went to work in Bradley, where they make pop cans.
Yeah, the cork and seal.
Cork and seal, I guess it is. Yeah. And as far as I know, he still works there.
The whole time you're working for Russell, you're still doing your own printing at home. And then finally, what was the point where you're like, okay, I know that I can do this completely on my own?
Well, I just figured I could. It's been going pretty well, and if my business was going to be right on Highway 50, and that's just what we did. And I opened it up on the day after Labor Day on 71. And I don't know if the first or second day, my wife and I were getting ready to go to lunch, and here cars pulling in at 12 o'clock. Well, I thought, darn it, we're just going to lunch. Well, happened to be, there were fellas from the purchasing department from Bennett's Industries in Peatone.
Oh.
And they come in and wanted to know if I could do some of their printing for them. I said, sure. And that started a thing until they moved out of town. That was a good first customer. And I did a lot of work for Azzarelli Construction Company until they closed the doors.
Right.
From about 72, I think.
But even after that, you did construction, or you continued to print for Kankakee. What is it? KC. what's their name now? Kankakee Valley Construction Corp?
Yeah,
right?
that's what it is now. But it was Azzarelli's then,
right? But
and I still do it.
We were still doing it up until the business closed this last year. Yeah,
they were a good loyal customer.
Right,
they didn't lose them.
Yeah,
I didn't lose them. They lost me. Is what happened.
Right. Yeah. But that was one of the longest customers we had.
Yeah.
And for point of reference, so Weber Printing, the building is right across from Burcott's in Manteno, just for point of reference.
Across the street.
But one of the, so it's 1971. You open the doors, business starts taking off more and more, and one of the milestones, I would say, for the business was when we started printing those fortune cookie slips.
Ann and I and John worked with me. We went uptown for lunch one day, and when we got back,
what year was this? By the way,
about 74 or 5.
Okay.
They had a phone call from Chicago and Chinese people in the fortune cookie business, and they were getting their fortune papers printed in San Francisco, and they were having trouble getting them. They were never on time. And he was he liked to play poker. And a good friend of mine from Manteno also liked to play poker. And this Tommy that had the business in Chicago also had a Cliff and Tommy's restaurant in Moline. And that's where they go and play cards on Sunday.
Is that still there?
It's still there, different name.
Right.
And so he was telling me his troubles about not getting papers. And he said, well, maybe you should go talk to Weber in Manteno. Well, he didn't know if he could do that. Well, he says, you should ask him. So maybe the next day or whenever they called and wanted to talk about that. So when I got back from lunch and heard all that, I called them up and found out what they wanted. And I cut up some paper, a couple of different kinds of paper to the size they wanted. And I sent it to them to see if that would run through their cookie machines okay. And one of them worked fine, and that's what we did. And so I think I printed up maybe 500 pounds of papers. That's how we sold it to them, by the pound. And we sent that over there, and it worked fine. And for about 20 years, we printed their papers. And then they also were involved with a sister company in Houston. And then we got to be printing their papers. And that went on for a long time. And then one day I got a call from another fellow in Houston, wanted me to print his papers. And I told him I didn't think I would maybe want to do that because I had a customer there already and they wouldn't be happy with me doing their competitors' work. Yeah. So I just left it like that and didn't think no more about it. About 3-4 days later, here that guy comes walking in the front door. He got on a plane, flew to Chicago, and rented a car and come down and begged me to print his papers. And so I relented, and I did. And we printed those, I think, for 3 years.
Because Golden Dragon was the competitor, right? Did they ever find out about that?
Golden Dragon was the original owner, original customer.
Yeah.
And then they had their sister company, Noodles of China, in Houston, and then this other one.
The competitor, you can't remember.
I forgot the name of his right now.
Yeah, but anyway, did Golden Dragon ever find out about it?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
because
okay.
when the truck would deliver papers to the one in Houston, there might be some on there for this other fella, and they'd see that. See, that's what I was worried about.
And did he ever mention anything to you?
They teased me about it.
Did they?
Yeah, kind of, but nothing ever happened. I said we printed papers until. Some Vietnamese came to Chicago and started printing fortune cookies or making fortune cookies, and they made them cheaper than what the Chinese people could, and they just finally give it up, and I didn't get no more work done.
Yeah, it would trickle in once in a while. Like he would still call us up once in a while.
Yeah, but we did special orders too, along with all this big order.
Yeah,
for all kinds of different reasons. We print special papers. Maybe 1,000, might be 5,000, might only be 150, but we do that.
Yeah, it wasn't the regular everyday.
The other ones
cookies.
We'd ship out like 2,500 pounds at a clip.
Yeah,
big skids of them, and I think the weight was 32,000 pounds in a year for 3 different cookie houses.
Yeah,
we were
it's
running
in
a lot of paper.
it's in the book, and I forget it's in your memoir, and I can't remember the exact number either, but literally
it was a bunch because my oldest son cut all those papers on a paper cutter.
Dan Weber.
Yeah. And he had we sold it by the pound, so we had to keep track of the weight. And so he always kept track of it and how much he shipped out each time. And at the end of the year, he'd tally all that up, and that's what it amounted to.
It's so cool to think our little town of Manteno had this print shop that literally would print the fortune cookie slips by the tons.
Yeah.
And did that for so long. So for me, growing up as a kid in the early 90s, when this business was still operating quite heavily with the fortune cookie slips, literally every time I would come into the print shop, because my mom, Dawn, worked there as a graphic designer. So I was there all the time. Every time I'd come in, you were in the back on the biggest press we had, printing fortunes.
Yeah.
And then I'd always see Uncle Danny. He was always cutting them up. We'd have to cut them up to size. He'd stuff them all in a box and, like you said, weigh them out, and then away they would go.
Yeah.
And when they would come pick them up, I always loved that they left us they give us bags upon bags of the broken fortune cookies.
Yeah, the fortune didn't stay into the cookie when it made the fold the cookie dough, and that paper is supposed to set down and it's supposed to fold it, and the paper stay inside. Well, a lot of them didn't, and so they'd have to take those out, and they get a bunch of them. They come down here, they'd bring 2 or 3 bags or whatever. And we kept some, and I'd send sometimes out to the veterans' homes, let the old soldiers have some fortunes.
And I think
we also got some nice cookies from them,
the
too.
almond cookies, right?
Yeah, they were good, yeah.
I just remember I would almost every time I was there, I would have a fortune cookie, or I'd eat one of those almond cookies, because there was always so many that it was kind of like having a candy bowl out.
Yeah.
Like it was always there.
Yeah.
I liked they even had, it's the only time I've ever had one, but they even had, remember they had the chocolate cookies? They had the chocolate fortune cookies they would sometimes bring us. Do you remember those?
I guess so, yeah.
That's the only time.
Forgot about them.
That's the only time I've ever had a chocolate fortune cookie. But
yeah, that was the rejects, yeah.
Right, the rejects. But that's the only time I've ever, all the different Chinese restaurants that I've been to, they've never given me a chocolate one.
And I think there was 2 other cookie houses in Chicago that I did work for too, but not on that big a scale.
Right.
And I started getting papers when people hear about how I printed these things. I don't know how they found out about it, but when the Chinese New Year or something would come around, I would get a clipping of a newspaper from Georgia, I think in Georgia maybe, where they saw in there, and I had mentioned that Weber Printing in Manteno, Illinois printed a lot of fortune cookies papers, and people would send me those clippings.
That's cool. That's really cool. So how did where do we go from there? So that started in 75. That went on till
in the 90s,
mid-late 90s, somewhere around there.
It seems like after 9/11 time, things started slowing down in my business. Electronics was coming in and changing the way the printing was going on, and printing wasn't as sound as it had been. So it started just dwindling a little bit, little by little, and we had work to do, but nothing like when we had all those fortunes to print. That was a good steady job.
Right. And for reference too, we talked about how you started off on a letterpress, but you did move to offset printing, which is probably the type of printing more people are more aware of.
Well, that's how we did the fortunes. They were all on offset printing.
Yeah, which is your instead of putting your type together with little pieces of lead and stuff, you're actually burning your type
with photography. You're working photography and film.
Yeah,
And a lot of those fortunes too, we had to print on the back side lotto
the lotto numbers, right?
They wanted lotto numbers on there, so we had to print lotto numbers. So I had a press that print on one side and turn the sheet over and print on the other side, so it all come out at one time. Otherwise, you'd have had to print one side, run all the paper back through, handle it, and print it again. So you got what you call a perfector press, and that would do that. So that worked out very well.
It was all sheet fed presses.
Yeah.
It wasn't the web press, which is the press with the big roll of paper.
No.
And with offset, you're using a plate. Your image and your type is on a plate.
Thin aluminum plate, yeah,
right.
real thin. And the ink inks it up, and in the plate, when the press goes on impression to print, it puts the image on the rubber blanket cylinder, and then when the paper goes through, the rubber blanket cylinder presses on the paper, and there's an impression cylinder under the paper, so that impresses the ink onto the paper and it's delivered out. And that's how that system works.
And there's also there is at least one small offset printing press at the Kankakee County Museum as well that
I think so.
You can see. I know there's at least one. They've got a little one color press there, kind of similar to some of the presses we had.
Yeah.
But in case anyone actually wants to, see one in person.
Yeah.
So obviously they're not going to operate it at the museum, but you can at least see it. So
for a long time, I always claimed that I had a museum, but I had a working museum because everything run. People come in the front to order stuff, and I get talking with them, and I'd bring them to the back and show them how things used to work. And they just loved to watch me run a linotype machine and set a linotype with their name on it. They just thought that was the greatest thing, and how that machine worked. It was all the intricacies about it. It was quite a thing.
Yeah. So we had you might be listening to this and thinking that you've been to the back of the museum that we had too, which is the equipment that I've been helping sell. So that's where all the letterpresses were, and we had something similar to the linotype, which is called an intertype.
Yeah, it's the same thing, just different name.
Just a different name, different brand, different company. Doors officially closed December 2020. And I mean, it's hard to see it go, but it's been good to be able, I've really enjoyed being able to spend more time with you lately and making sure all of the equipment finds a good home,
Yeah, that's been working out pretty good.
Yeah. And that's been fulfilling to do that, so I've really enjoyed doing that with you lately. So, but there's actually more stories to your memoir than just the printing stories too. There's all kinds of other stories as well. So if anyone wants to buy a copy of the Prairieland Printer, you can contact me and I can arrange to get you a copy. So, and I think my brother Josh, who helped with the book, I think he still has them on sale online. So if you type in Prairieland Printer on like a Google search, I can't remember the exact web address off the top of my mind, but I believe he still has it up for sale online. I'll actually, now that I think about it, I'll make sure to have a link at kankakeepodcast.com that you can go and you can buy the book, better yet. So, yeah. But you can always just contact me if you want to get a copy of it. So it's pretty interesting to hear all the different stories, because you're one of the people in the family that I got my interest in history from, So it's there's other kind of historical stories in there about Manteno or just about the area as well, in your memoir.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was interesting life, and I enjoyed it all, or I wouldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, going way back to when I first got that little printing press, after I got that day, it was a day or so later when I was visiting there, in the afternoon, a Mr. McGilvery came over to visit my aunt and uncle, and he was their insurance person. And so we were standing out in the backyard talking, and I was standing there too, and he says, "Young man, what would you like to be when you grew up?" I said, "I want to be a printer." Just like that. That's when I announced it.
And you were.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Oh, he says, "I don't know." He says, "I know some printers, and they didn't have a very good life." And what happened back in some of those early days where they had to print with this letterpress equipment that we talk about, and a lot of the times, a lot of the stuff was all handset type. And when they go printing with it, the little spaces between the words are always a lot shorter than the type for the words, letters. And in the process of printing, those they have a tendency to work up, and pretty soon you got a big black mark between two words. And they might print a bunch of them before they notice it, and they got to stop and probably throw some of that out and loosen the form up and push them down. And anyway, they had quite a time with that. And when 4 o'clock came and they got to go home, before they went home, they went to the corner saloon, and they all had a few drinks. And I think probably a lot of them become alcoholics, and he didn't want to see me being an alcoholic, so that's why he didn't think I should be a printer. But I was never one to be going to the neighbor's saloon, so I was okay. I didn't have no problem with that.
Well, anything else, Papa?
No, I think we pretty much got it. What I've done in my time, and
yeah.
There's probably a lot of things.
There's always something
that's in my book that I didn't talk about tonight.
Right, yeah. And there's just all the more reason that people need to read it. So
Yeah.
if they want to read a good story. So, but, sorry, go ahead.
Things how we lived during the war years. A lot of people would probably never want to do some of those things that we did. But anyway, we did, and come out fine.
Mm-hmm. 88 years old and you're still here, so
I'm still here going. Yeah, slowed down some, but
yeah,
still able to get around.
You get around pretty well, if you ask me, for being 88. So, but thank you, Papa, for
You're welcome.
For talking to me, and I'm glad we could record this conversation again. So we've done this a couple of times before, but this is the first time been able to actually kind of spread this out to the public everywhere on Kankakee Podcast. So
they may enjoy it. I don't know, but it was always enjoyment for me.
Yeah,
it was work, but I liked it. So
yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Papa.
Okay, you're welcome.
Well, that's it for Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake LaMore. Thank you so much for downloading this podcast and giving it a listen. If you get a chance, go back and listen to the previous episodes at kankakeepodcast.com, or you can find them wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kankakee Podcast. And while you're at it, give us a positive rating and review on Apple Podcasts, or once again, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. It really does go a long way. I will also have special pictures and videos to go along with this episode at kankakeepodcast.com. If you want to become a sponsor for the show, you can also find out about that on our website. And I look forward to talking with you next week. Our theme song is by Lupe Carroll.
People tend to stick to